I'm Julie Maloney, and the name of my book is A Matter of Chance. And A Matter of Chance tells one woman's journey over the course of 5 years as she searches for her missing child. And along the way, what happens is she transforms herself by painting her way through grief as she reconnects to a hidden passion.
Book lovers unite! I'm Demethius Jackson, and you're listening to the Chapter 1 podcast. The greatest stories ever written all begin with Chapter 1. In each episode, our guest authors will share their first chapters with you. Hey, everybody. On today's episode, I'm going to be speaking with a fantastic author. Julie Maloney is going to be sharing her debut novel with us. She previously published a book of poetry, and as she's reading, you can actually get a glimpse of the poet within her, so that's pretty awesome. Julie is also the founder and director of Women Reading Aloud, which is an international nonprofit that promotes female authors. So sit back, I think you're going to enjoy this one, and it starts right now.
The day Vinny and I lost each other, we woke early to have breakfast on the beach. A giant tote bag stuffed with towels, suntan lotion, and bottles of water rested against the back door. James and the giant peach, number 2 on Vinny's reading list, sat on the outside pocket next to the galleys for my new coffee table book, Fashion in the 20th Century, a spin-off from my editorial job at Hot Style magazine. A box of pastels, a gift from Evelyn, who lived downstairs, hid in the bottom of the bag. A ratty sketch pad peeked out at the top. Each day, I planned on taking the pastels out of the bag. But each day, my child wanted me to see something, walk somewhere, or talk more. She'd start by saying, "I have an idea." At the perfect spot, we spread the food out on the madeleines I had rescued from a flea market on Orchard Street on the Lower East Side. After we devoured the waffles and berries, Vinny and I walked along the beach. The early morning sunlight illuminated the world around us. Even the birds respected the quiet. In the distance, we saw them, Rudy and Hilda, strolling the way older people do, taking care not to get too close to the water's edge. They waved to us as we walked in their direction. The two fascinated Vinny because they were always together. "I think Rudy is Hilda's best friend. They're like you and me," she declared, as if giving this some thought. Her father and I had separated when she was 5. But now, 3 years later, Steve kept a distant presence in San Francisco. I remember how Vinny would just stand there and smile. She never turned away. What had she seen when I had been studying the color of the ocean? "Rudy and Hilda don't smile the same way," she said. "Rudy's lips turn up wide and his eyes look happy, but Hilda's eyes don't smile, even when her mouth does." I'm sure Hilda's happy. I smoothed away the dark, wavy hair from Vinny's right cheek as I spoke without thinking. On our way back up the beach, I stopped on one of the hilly sand piles common to the Jersey shore and leaned over to remove a piece of shell wedged in between my toes. That's when I saw Rudy slumped over in the sand. At first, I wasn't sure as he and Hilda were far away, but something made me grab Vinny and run. By the time we reached them, Hilda was leaning in close to Rudy's face. Her arms wrapped around his shoulders as she knelt beside him. He was whispering in German. Hilda nodded, crying softly, kissing his cheeks. She held his right hand against her chest. The muscles in his face twisted, but he reached for Hilda's shirt collar with knotted fingers and said, "Geh." Twice more he repeated the word, "Geh, geh, go, go." I told Vinny to stay with Hilda and Rudy while I raced home to call 911. Usually a cell phone addict, I had tried all summer long to wean myself off this seductive attachment. I have gone over and over why I made this choice, why I made Vinny stay on the beach. As I reached the front porch of the summer cottage, I turned back and the breeze from the ocean swept sand across my face. I blinked away the grainy flecks, and as my eyes focused in the distance by the water's edge, I saw Vinny's hand on Hilda's shoulder. Hilda was sitting in the sand with Rudy's head on her lap. I don't know if I imagined it or not, but later I thought I had heard Hilda singing to Rudy. After making the 911 call at the house, I turned around too fast and tripped over a pile of books stacked on the floor by the couch near the front door. I stumbled and grabbed the air. My arm landed on the lampshade Vinny's head reminded her of an old lady's hat. I had regained my balance and kept moving. As I slammed the door behind me, I heard a loud crash and knew the table lamp had fallen. I hurried to the spot where I had left Vinny. She and Hilda were gone. The faded color of Rudy's lips stopped me from touching him. I knelt down and put my ear to his chest. Rudy was dead. I looked up and saw two men dressed in shore police attire, white shirts, navy Bermuda shorts, and skinny navy ties running in my direction. Two people from the rescue squad, one woman and one man, carried a stretcher behind them. The tide stilled. The earth stopped its rotation. "Where's my daughter?" I said to the cop who reached me first. "Where did they go?" I closed my arms around my chest. The August sun was hot for so early in the morning. I shaded my eyes with the side of my hand. Both policemen were on their knees in the sand, bent over Rudy. "Who?" the woman from the rescue squad asked as she looked around. My daughter was here with Hilda. "I don't know. Do you know this man?" the policeman interrupted, looking up at me with a baby face full of summer freckles. "His name is Rudy Hayden. He lives in the yellow clapboard house on Morris Avenue, 2 blocks down at number 23. My daughter..." I slowed a bit and looked around. Why did Hilda leave Rudy? Didn't Vinny just say last night that they were best friends? "My daughter must be with Hilda," and then I added, "She's 8. I said it again. "She's only 8. My throat closed a little, the way it used to when my father would tell me that my mother had to return to the hospital. "Who is Hilda?" the policeman asked as he bent over Rudy. No one was there but Rudy and me. "Hilda is his wife. I looked around. "She must have taken Vinny back to the house," I said, wondering aloud to no one. Panic waited in the pit of my stomach. A few early risers stopped and stared at Rudy. 2 women in their mid-30s, both with sun-streaked hair pulled back in a ponytail, had been jogging. They looked like typical Spring Haven mothers. Good skin, trim bodies. They wore the latest running shoes tied in double knots. Women like this learned all about life from their own mothers. They combed their children's hair before they went to school, scrambled eggs, and watered their plants so they wouldn't die. "Do you need help here?" the taller one asked. I shook my head. The younger of the 2 policemen questioned an older couple and a single man in his 40s walking a golden retriever. Dogs were allowed on the beach until 8 a.m. If Vinny had been here, I know she would have stopped to pet the dog. More heads shook. No one had seen Rudy fall. More time passed. No one had seen a little girl with an older woman leave on the beach. I continued. "My daughter was here with Rudy and Hilda. I left her here to make the call." "We'll send someone over to the house," the young policeman said. His voice was deep with confidence. Salt and sun had bleached away some of the letters on the officer's nameplate. "Oh, what's your daughter's name?" "Vinny. Lavinia. Everyone calls her Vinny." Should I have fled and run to Hilda's instead of staying with Rudy? I must have been with the officers on the beach for at least 20 minutes. No one moved fast. Maybe it was the heat or the summer laziness that affects small-town police departments. "We'll need your numericals," the older police officer said as he stepped to my side. "Numericals?" I asked. "Full ID, Social Security, how long you've been down here. You'll have to come to the station and answer some questions." Yes, but I've got to find Hilda. My daughter. I'm sure my daughter's with her." I ran toward the yellow house. Rudy and Hilda had always kept their front door unlocked. As a New Yorker accustomed to locked doors, I found this strange. Now when I turned the handle, the door didn't budge. I called out for Hilda as the sun beat down hard on my head. To the right of the top step where I stood, I saw Hilda's beach shoes, old brown sandals with ankle straps, thrown to the side in the garden, sitting among the purple and white pansies. It had been at least 50 minutes since I had last seen Vinny. Hilda's shoes tossed in with fresh mulch sent a wave of illness over my body. Vinny, I screamed as I banged on the door. I ran around to the back door and pushed it open. The silence in the house lashed across my face. I raced from room to room. Why did I take so long? I heard someone come up the steps and turned to see the young officer from the beach. I checked all the rooms. They're not here, I said. What's happening? Where are they? My voice rose as I moved my face close to his, and he took a soft step back. Something's not right. Where are they? Repeating the words offered no comfort. Another officer who had been dispatched to check the house before I got there. He had been poking around the garage. The car's gone, he said, as he stepped inside the kitchen. Looks like someone had an oil leak. There's fresh drops of oil on the concrete floor. 16 minutes had passed since I had last seen Vinny. And that's the end of chapter 1.
Well, although you've previously published poetry, A Matter
Yes.
of Chance is your debut novel.
That's right, it is.
So how are you feeling now that this process is finally over and you have it out there?
I'm very excited and I'm terrified.
Do tell.
Well, because, when you're thinking about having something happen for a long time and then it actually is happening, the acknowledgement of the reality of that can be quite overwhelming.
Yes. Did you find the novel writing and publishing process different or more challenging than it was for poetry?
It is different. It's different, obviously, because there's the whole idea of plot that's involved. And even though there is certainly with poetry the love of language, which definitely spurs me on as a writer, I always say whenever I'm getting a little stuck or I need a breath of fresh air, I reach for a book of poetry. And that just gives me more oxygen to go back to the page.
Right. I've spoken to a few poets and they almost describe their poetry as individual characters, some of them at least. So that's what I was curious about. If you saw smooth transition or did you find it challenging?
It's challenging, but it helps also to be a lover of words. It's still sitting down on a consistent basis and finding your way.
You've actually been on the literary scene for quite some time as the founder and director of Women Reading Aloud, which is an international nonprofit that promotes female authors.
Yes, that's actually, it's 15 years old now.
Mm.
And Women Reading Aloud, I started Women Reading Aloud really with 12 writers sitting around my dining room table in my home. It just continued as I was offering workshops, and then I began to offer retreats that are now in the USA and in Greece, France, and we're working on one in Prague right now.
Mm-hmm.
And so all of that has happened over the past 15 years. And I think because there really was a need for a community where women writers could come together and feel supported at whatever genre they're working on and whatever level of their creative journey.
So what services do you offer to the writers?
I really offer these writing workshops and retreats. Retreats are usually, sometimes they're a weekend, sometimes they're 10 days or a week. And then I also bring in other writers to interview them. I bring in other writers to have a writing and yoga program and things like that. People can actually go to the website and they can find all the things that we do offer. But I follow the Amherst Writers and Artists method, where writers, they come to a workshop and I give them prompts or exercises and they write spontaneously. And then we read the work aloud and we talk about what's working in the piece. There's no dialogue between the writer and the listeners. The nice thing is the writer just reads her work, sits back and listens to what's working, because it's about spontaneous writing, how you can discover material, on the page and not have that inner critic hush you.
That's actually a great way not only to increase your writing ability or enhance your writing ability, but you also learn about yourself as a writer.
You're so right about that. I always say that writing tells us what we didn't know we knew.
Yeah. So this is what I'm trying to figure out. While running the organization, in addition to your workshops, your speaking engagements, how on earth were you able to find time to write this novel?
It's so funny because people are asking me the same thing. When do I have the time to do this? But I think when you really challenge yourself, and for me, writing the novel has been a personal challenge. Not that poetry isn't as well, it certainly is, but I wanted to really tackle this new genre. And also when the characters get fixed in my head, they just wouldn't let go. And I had to pay attention to them. And they got noisy. I have to tell you, they got pretty noisy. And finding the time, I think, obviously, when we love doing something or we challenge ourselves, that we're passionate about it, I think then we all do find the time.
So what exactly inspired the story of a mother who's desperately trying to find her child and basically stumbling into this underworld of crime?
Yes. Well, I wanted to, first of all, write about the person left behind when tragedy strikes. And so I wanted this to be the story of the mother, who is Maddy Stewart, and the story of her child, even though Vinni, of course, is in the story, it really does revolve around what happens to Maddy. And I had discovered Maddy many years ago in a workshop to a prompt. I couldn't even tell you what the prompt was, but this woman appeared on the page, and I thought, I like her. I think she has a story. So I would think about her from time to time and write a little bit and then put her away and then bring her back. And then I would say about 5 years ago, I just really decided I had to complete her story. I had to find out what were going to be the obstacles that she had to overcome. The character wants to be heard, and I became very attached to her and to the other people that eventually I discovered who were in her life.
Tell us about your main character, Maddy. I'm guessing she was pretty much an ordinary person until her life just got flipped upside down by the disappearance of her daughter.
Yes, you absolutely got it. Yes, she was a single parent, and she had a job in New York City as a fashion editor for a magazine. And she was raising her child, loving her child, and things were going along. And then that's why the title, A Matter of Chance, it really, really did become a matter of chance. Mm-hmm. How things happened and who saw Vinni, the child, on the beach, and how that child was reminiscent of someone else's sorrow and why this all happened. Mm-hmm. The FBI, of course, comes in and works with the investigation. This is a small town, and there's a detective on the police force who's in charge of the investigation just for the town. But of course, this is a federal offense, so the FBI comes in. Mm-hmm. And then when the FBI explores all the leads and it gets a little more quiet, the detective, though, doesn't like the idea that this missing child has happened basically on his watch. So he becomes a little actually romantically involved with Maddy. And over the course of 5 years, he sees how Maddy, as desperate as she is, she does begin to change as she finds art in her life. And there's a neighbor who lives downstairs from Maddy in her building in New York City, and who is a famous artist. And when she sees Maddy grieving, she puts a brush in her hand and she says, paint. And Maddy reconnects to this hidden passion that she used to have. And over the course of 5 years, what happens is not only does she stumble upon some other heinous crime, she also discovers her own way of living and grieving and moving from day to day by painting.
So during your writing process, did you actually know the direction the story was going to take? Or did you discover things along the way about the story or about Maddy or even about yourself as a writer?
Well, I love this kind of a question because actually I'm not the kind of writer who outlines ahead.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it might in some way be a little bit easier if I did outline it. But I sit down and I'm thinking about it, of course, but I'm showing up on the page and seeing what happens. So it's a more organic process. I just sit down and write. Of course, I research, and the research helps tremendously. I did go to Germany because actually the muse for this book, which I do have to mention because I love this artist, is Kontakovitz from Germany, and who is Germany's most revered artist. And several years ago, I just was in the Morgan Library in New York City. And as I was writing the book, and I came across this drawing by Kovitz, and that had to do with a grieving mother and a child in her arms. And I just thought I have to find out more about this artist. And the more I learned, I discovered that Kovitz actually has 2 museums dedicated solely to her work in Germany, one in Berlin and one in Cologne. So I went to Cologne. I said, I have to go there. I have to go to this museum. I must learn more about this artist. And I have to tell you, it was an amazingly emotional experience to go to this museum and walk in. And there was all the work that I had been reading about, so much of the work. So the research trip and driving around Bavaria, which is, I don't want to give the ending away, but which ended up having a lot to do with the book. And then learning about crime, learning about serious crime. That I had lots of conversations and met with an undercover DEA agent who was working in Brooklyn. And so I had to learn about crime. And so a writer doesn't always write about what they know at all. Most of the time, a writer is writing about what they don't know.
Sure, absolutely. And with a story like this, of course you can go on the internet, of course you can research, but the fact that you actually went to these locations and experienced them, that's what I thought was fascinating. And I think it gives not only authenticity into the story, but also into yourself, into your own personality and creativity.
Yes, for me, I wanted to actually use my senses. I wanted to visually take in the environment. I wanted to visually really take in all the sights, the sounds, and it just was very important for me. But again, I was so drawn to this artist, and she now has a place in my heart that will stay there forever.
What do you think it was about her artwork that appealed to you?
When I walked into the museum, as I mentioned before, I actually started to cry. I just thought, my goodness, I am really here. And I just had discovered this one drawing. And then, as you say, I did research on the internet, but then I said, no, I have to go there to this museum. And first of all, her life, Kovitz's life. She lived a life of having to endure great tragedy. She lost her son as well as her grandson, both in war. And she was a constant advocate for the forlorn and for those who were suffering, for the poverty-stricken. She would draw these images so that when there would be, I have some of them actually on my website, and she would draw these images where you would see, let's say, a woman's back, and maybe she was holding a child, that she was just able to convey pain, and she was able to convey emotion on the canvas in a way that completely has captivated me. Of course, I bought several books at the museum, and that they would have exquisite replicas of her drawings. And sometimes I would just sit at my desk and I would just go and turn the pages of these books and just look at the images to see where they would take me and to what depth I would go to. I love the idea of using one art form to motivate me into establishing another art form for myself.
Yeah. For all the writers listening right now, what lessons did you learn from creating and publishing this book that you're going to take into the next book project?
I would say to write faster. And I have actually written the second book, which is a sequel to this one. It's being edited quite a bit. I'm going through the editing process, but I like the idea that the bones are down on the page, which is helpful. And I did it faster. I think now I'm hooked. I'm hooked on novel writing. So once I'm hooked, then, I mean, there's no stopping me really, because I want to give it everything. But my advice is, as far as what I've learned is that, we don't know we can do something unless we really try 150%.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you will find that the next novels will actually develop a lot faster because you've already laid that groundwork in your first book. The world is already there. The characters are already established. So at this point, you can really just get into the story, into the plot, and just push it even further.
Yeah, that's exactly what I've been doing. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because actually there's a secondary character named Tuba, and she is in A Matter of Chance in this first book. But she had such a loud voice that I had to quiet in the first book. But I decided I would give her her own book. So Tuba, the next story, the next book, is written in Tuba's voice as well as in her daughter's voice. So it's a back and forth between the mother and the daughter, and seeing the same situations from two different viewpoints. But I discovered Tuba writing this book. And so the easier part was that I already knew I had to give her her own story.
Mm-hmm. And as you write that book, there's no telling where that's going to lead to as well.
I know. That's the fun part, isn't it?
Yeah, that's one of the joys of being an author. Just when the book becomes its own entity, or when the book takes on a life of its own and just goes in the direction it's going to go in, and you're just along for the ride.
Well, it's a hectic ride. Not every day is smooth sailing, but it's completely for me. And I think other novelists will say it's worth the challenge. It's worth the effort, as enormous as it is, because there are many days you really don't know most days you don't know where you're going, but you have to trust the process. If you trust the process, and that is another thing that I have learned, that trusting the process is perhaps the most important thing. If you stick with it, and trust, you'll come out with a story eventually. You don't know when, but eventually you will.
Where can readers go to learn more about your books and your organization?
They can go to womenreadingaloud.org for the organization for writers. And they can also go to find out about Julie Maloney, the author, at juliemaloney.net.
And with that, we're going to wrap up another episode. Thanks again to Julie for joining us today. If you have a question for her or for me, or you know an author who you think would be a good fit for the show, let me know. Connect with me on social media, Facebook, YouTube, or email me at info@ch1podcast.com. Check out our website at ch1podcast.com, where you can listen to previous episodes and hopefully find your next favorite author. Subscribe to us on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, and SoundCloud, and Overcast. We're on that now. But most importantly, leave a review and tell everyone you know about the show. And I think that's it for me. You all stay awesome. Till next time.